Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 3 of Dutchy Patterns Forklift build. Well, last week on the show we made some great progress. We had some challenging moments with some of the pieces, but not a problem. We're going to carry on today, so let's get this on the way. There's a lot to cover, so let's head over to the bench. Well, I have the forklift put together in a dry fit. Nothing here is glued in place. And what we need to make is we need to make these pieces 5B. And we can see that they're triangles. And guys, don't beat yourself up over trying to make these pieces. You already have the stock and you already have it cut at the proper angle and you already have it cut out of the exact species that you need. It is the offcuts of this angle that we made or that we cut from the engine sides. So all we need to do is take a careful measurement and mark it and cut those pieces so that they fit perfectly in place. Now, truth be told, what I'm going to do is because they need to be flush against this edge, I'm going to cut them just a little bit proud, and we're going to move them up just ever so slightly so that they're about maybe 1/2 millimeter proud of what this surface is. And after we get that in place, once it's all glued together, we're going to do some sanding. We're going to use our sandpaper on the MDF and we're going to flatten this whole surface so that everything lines up. And as well, we're going to clean up this convex profile, and we'll do that with some hand sanding with a block of MDF and some sandpaper. But first things first, let's get these triangles cut and get them roughly fit into place. While we're waiting for the glue to dry, we're going to cut this piece 6C. Now this is a tiny little piece measuring only 10 millimeters long, 4 millimeters wide. This is minute, and we're going to cut it on the scroll saw. So let me take you over there and show you how we're going to do this. You might like this little tip. Well, I have the profile of what I want cut marked out on a piece of walnut, but the throat here of the scroll saw is way too large. That piece is going to fall through the second we cut it. So what we need is a zero clearance insert. And guys, when you're cutting small parts, you can very easily make a zero clearance insert just with an old business card. And all you want to do is place it over top of the hole in your table, and using some clear tape, we will just flatten it out and tape it in place. Once you have it secured, just roughly somewhere in the middle here, you can just guess where your blade wants to be centered, and put it in place. Tighten it into your blade retainer at the bottom, and then tension your blade and just run your saw just for a second. And it will automatically veer over to where it needs to be. Instant zero clearance insert. So we can cut this piece now and not have to worry about it falling down through the hole and having it lost on the floor after we get it cut. There you go. And when you are done with your zero clearance insert, you can just peel up the tape and throw it out, and you're back to normal. And there is that small little piece done with the 13 millimeter long dowel glued in place. We will just sit this here into our backer piece, and we can glue this now in place. Right here. We'll glue that, we'll let it dry, and from there we'll get this all sanded up until we're happy with the profile. Our lights, guys, this is nothing more than, in my case, a 3/4 inch dowel that we're going to sand down to give a rounded profile on the top, and we can cut those and glue those in place there as well. So give everything a good sanding, get it the way you like it, and then we can move on. And once you get your headlight shaped and fit in there and everything sanded up, this is what you end up with. And it's looking really great. I've also added here a little bit of a laser embellishment. Heister, the forklift company, figured I'd add that on there and, you know, make it a little more detailed. So the next piece really doesn't need much of an explanation, guys. It is part 5A. It's one of the engine parts. It's a very simple cut piece, 112 millimeters long, 43 wide, and it has this radius of 238 millimeters. Again, all I did was use the pattern, make a template, draw it out, and sand it, and that will get glued right on top here. And you just want to make sure that it sits flush on all surfaces. Now you can really see here where using the offcuts or the triangles from this cut really made a difference, because they're an absolute perfect fit because it's the exact same angle. And we just use the table saw to do the offcut, and look how great that looks. Okay, so we can get that piece glued in place. Well, angles can be some of the most confusing things during a model build. And on this next piece that we're going to make, piece 7A, it has a very simple angle here on the end, and it's marked at 53 degrees. Now here's the problem, and it's not really a problem, but it's marked at 53 off of this plane here. You really can't think of it that way, because in order to do that, you would need to cut your wood or run it through the saw in this configuration, and that's not exactly a safe method. So you need to think of what the angle would be off of a flat plane. So the angle, in other words, off of this flat plane would actually be 37 degrees. And you can do that by taking 90 degrees, which would be if you cut it square, and reducing or subtracting this 53 degree angle, and that'll give you 37. So if we set our table saw at 37 degrees, we can easily rip our rough cut piece for part 7A to get the angle on the edge that we need. Now the same principles can be applied to part 7B, which will be the next one we're going to make. And with that piece here, we have this 70 degree angle on both sides. That is a 70 degree angle measured off of this plane here, which is actually right. However, we don't tilt our saw blade to 70 degrees. What we do is we start off at 90 degrees, which we consider as its 0 point kind of thing. So if we take our 70 degree angle and we subtract it from 90 degrees, we end up with 20. And that, in fact, is what you're setting your table saw blade at, a 20 degree angle to cut these guys over here. So try not to get confused. You just need to think about, how do I need to tilt my table saw to equal this 70 degree angle? Is this number wrong? Absolutely not. But we need to think of it in terms of setting your saw or your equipment, not necessarily in how it's drawn. So a 20 degree angle will get these two cut just perfectly. And we'll just turn this around so that we can see, if we compare it to the drawing now, you can see that we've got the right angle there, and that was by setting our table saw at the 37 degrees. 90 minus this 53 gave us the table saw setting. And the same thing goes for this piece here. We have our angles cut, and that is all there is to it. So just keep that in mind, guys. Don't be intimidated by the angles. You just have to think a little differently. So this piece right here now, 7A, it does call for this 2 millimeter radius roundover on both of the ends. I don't have that kind of a bit. I'm an Imperial guy, so I'm actually going to use some sandpaper on MDF, and I'm going to hand sand this to get the radius that I want. I don't even have an Imperial equivalent to this. So the next part that we want to look into here will be this section, and this is rather easy. We need to put this little rabbet here, and that could be very easily done over at the table saw. It's 3 millimeters deep. We can see here that the shoulder is 48 millimeters from the tip of this end. So we're going to get that cut, and these other little notches here, we can get our dimensions off of the drawing, 10 millimeters back, 9 millimeters in. We're going to mark them on our piece, and I'm just going to cut them at the scroll saw. And when we get that done, I'll show you what I ended up with. And for the most part, that is this piece finished. Now we can see here on the drawing, there is very slight radiuses here, little roundovers. That will be hand sanding, guys. So using the same theory now as far as angles go, we're going to cut this piece here. However, even with our theories of angles, it kind of makes this a little tricky. This 37-degree angle here is off of this end plane, which means that you would have to cut the board up on end, which I don't really like. Even if we subtract this 37 from 90, that is a 53-degree angle, and whose table saw tilts at 50 degrees to be able to cut it on this flat plane? So we're going to kind of work around this by using a much larger block of material and cutting that angle first. We're going to cut this 37-degree angle first with the board up on its end, and then we can go from there. And with that sharp angle now cut in our block, this surface here on our larger block is actually this surface, or this one right here. And if I turn this around just so you can see and compare those angles here, you can see that they're exactly right. That is the right angle. So this is our next step now. What we're going to do is I'm going to lay out the profile of this on our block. Paying attention mostly at this point to the thickness of it at 10 millimeters, measured down from the top here and marked squarely across, and as well the length of 59 millimeters that will be marked from this point out here to the furthest point out here for this angle, which brings me to my next point. 127 degrees. Well, that is measured from this bottom plane here. So this is 127 degrees measured from this around. But if we use our theory for the table saw and figure that this here, this is our starting point at 90 degrees, and we need to tilt this to equal this angle here, 127 degrees is greater than our base number of 90 that I had said before, which is our starting point. That's where our blade is. It's at 90 degrees. So if we take 90 from 127, you end up with 37 degrees. This is the exact same angle, just measured or cut from different planes. This 37-degree cut was cut from this plane. This 37-degree cut will be cut from this plane here. So by marking out our piece on the edge here, we'll be able to set our fence in such a way to get this angle cut next. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to cut this 37-degree angle. And now with both of our angles cut, I've reset the blade to 90 degrees from the table, and we're going to set the fence to have this cut as an offcut to get the thickness of our piece. And the last thing to do, of course, is to cut it to its final length of 112 millimeters. And you can just do that using your miter fence over at the table saw. Well, the next piece that I want to work on is this 7D, and this is actually the seat support. We can see it here on the assembly drawings, and this piece, although it looks somewhat simple, it has got some tricky little quirks to it, and that would be, again, the angles. They're going to throw you for a loop if you don't pay attention. So I have our pieces that we've just made here, with the exception of our front dashboard, which will sit up here. I have these kind of set in place. And if we look at the assembly drawing, we can see that the back of this seat support is going to mesh completely with the piece that we just made, which is that funny angle piece of 7C, and that's right here. So this back edge here, this is the bottom, this is the back edge, this edge mates with this piece 7C. And you might think it's a little tricky, but it is the same angle as what this ends up to be, and that is 53 degrees. And that will be the first angle that we're going to cut, which is this one. We're going to use the same larger block that we cut our last piece out of, and believe it or not, just like we did before, we're going to cut this. It's a 37-degree angle. You take it from 90 and we're just going to cut it on a different plane. So instead of cutting it from the flat and trying to make this 53 degrees, we're going to flip it up on end. We're going to tilt our blade to 37 degrees and we're going to cut that. So let's get that cut and then I'll show you the next angle you want to work on. So that there is your 53-degree angle cut, and we can just hold it up to our piece here, to our forklift, and see that it fits quite nicely there. That is the seat support. So the next angle that we want to cut is going to be this one right here. Now this one is not really crucial. So you can just measure off of here as to where it goes. If you're interested in the angle of it, it's a 20-degree angle, and we're going to cut this over at the table saw. We're just going to tilt our blade 20 degrees, and in the same fashion that we just did, we're going to run this through here to get the angle cut in the right proportions to this one here. Well, we're just going to set our blade back to 90 degrees to the saw. And we're going to measure in on our block 20 millimeters from this outside edge. You can see our two angles. This is actually the bottom. The piece actually sits like this in the model. So we're going to need 22 millimeters up from the bottom. And what we're going to do, because we have such a wide shoulder here, we're going to set the height of our blade. We're going to rotate this piece just like this and set this as an off cut, just like we did with our other pieces. And we're going to cut that piece out of there to complete the angles on this piece 7D. And after cross cutting it to length, we can see how absolutely beautiful and perfect that piece is and how nicely it fits there. If you just pay attention to the angles and be careful of how you cut them. Guys, don't try to cut this from a block that is cut to its original size. Use a larger block. I never ended up using this original block from this first piece because there wasn't enough play in it for me to be able to do it safely. It didn't leave enough of a surface area to register with a table saw. There was too much rock in it. I said, forget it. I'm not doing that. It's too dangerous. And as you saw in the video, I used a much beefier piece of stock for this. So be very careful when you're cutting these pieces. Keep in mind that you want the piece as stable as it can be while you're running it through the table saw, if that's your method that you choose. But there we go. There is the seat support done. There is some roundovers here on these edges. Right here, that will be this edge here and this edge here on both sides. I'm not comfortable using the router table for that. It's too small of a piece. It's too awkward to clamp into any kind of a jig to hold it, to route it safely. So because of that, I'm not doing it. If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. I've always said that. I'm going to hand sand those roundovers, and although they may not be 100% perfect, in the grand scheme of the entire model, they'll be perfect as far as my fingers will still be intact and they'll still have a nice rounded profile on them. Well, with the exception of our front dashboard here, this little front piece, I think I'm going to glue these pieces that we've just made in place. This one here, as well as this little guy and our seat support. We're going to pay attention to the drawing to make sure that they're all lined up the way they should. Guys, if you have straight edges or setup blocks, they would go a long way to helping you align these edges here perfectly. So don't be afraid to use those. Well, I've got this backer piece glued in here. That's part 7A. Before I continue any further, remember that recess back in part 1A, way back on page 2. That recess is going to sit right here. And Once we get these pieces on, we can cut that recess. But what I would suggest to you at this point, while you have no other blocks in your way, I would suggest marking the shoulders of this so that you know exactly where they are. So we're going to get those marked, and then we can glue the other pieces in place. Well, the first thing we're going to do in order to make this little recess is I'm going to file it down. I have it completely marked out. We don't want to be too aggressive here. This is just handwork, guys. I don't think we need a super long video of it. But I'm going to file down here so that my filings match this line here on the profile and this line here on the profile. And once I get it so that there's just this little corner of material left, I'm going to use a chisel to chisel that out. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today's show. A little bit possibly confusing for some, as sometimes those angles that are listed on plans or prints, they can become cumbersome and they can become confusing. But just, you have to keep in mind that the angle that's drawn is not necessarily the angle that you set on your saw. And at least in this case, with Dutchy's Patterns, or even in Toys and Joy's patterns, they give you that angle on the drawing so that you can cut a piece and compare it to make sure that you have the right settings on your tool. If you're not sure, guys, you can always cut pieces of scrap before you apply the saw to your actual material. But either way, just keep the angles in mind and all should be good. Guys, we made some good progress today. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. If you are interested in getting a hold of a set of these plans, I will place the link to Dutchy's Patterns website down below. I will also place a link there for the forklift pattern in case you want to get a set for yourself and follow along in this build. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You click the bell and then you won't miss the notifications of future episodes of the program. Guys, I want to thank you a ton for tuning in today. I hope you've enjoyed the content so far. I hope that you're going to give this a try, get a set of these plans and follow along at home. But more importantly, I hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.